We've got some big-time stuff going down here in Tuscaloosa involving Captain Crunch this morning, Tim.
Yeah, it's a tough act to follow. It's like when Richard Pryor probably started his tour. Some poor guy came on after him and got booed off the stage. That's how I feel now.
Now, Tim, is there a cereal that you'll die on that hill for? Is there a go-to?
I would murder you over Fruity Pebbles.
Over Fruity
Pebbles.
Pebbles.
Bury you in my backyard without hesitation. Write
Not the
stories in your
chocolate
name
pebbles.
and pretend you were still living.
What if somebody tried to steal the milk that's left from the Fruity Pebbles? Is that's probably the worst
thing about Fruity Pebbles, they can go solo. They're like sort of like freeze dried, like they're like raisins, versions of grapes. You can eat them by the handful. They're like Skittles, dried up Skittles.
You know what I bet was really the crux of the issue down there in Moundville involving this Captain Crunch? The real topper that put it over the top was that my boy probably cherry-picked all the berries out of the box, too. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. That'll start one.
Hey, back in the childhood days, me and my older brother would fight in the front yard if something like that happens. Somebody cherry-picked.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lucky Charms was another one. People go in there and pull out all the marshmallows. Yeah, you just left whatever
Speaking of cherry picking, we'll try to get this thing back between the ditches as quickly as possible. Recruiting and something that obviously Nick Saban has done at a level unlike any we've seen in recent college football history. A little bit of a different feel, though, Tim, to this latest recruiting class. And, Saban talked about it yesterday at his press conference late yesterday afternoon, and he was asked about it. It wasn't unsolicited. But the turnover on the staff that we saw this time around, and combine that with an early signing period going in as well, was it sort of the perfect storm to the kind of finish that we saw for Alabama yesterday?
Yeah, I just think the whole cycle, and, we warned people on Bama Online that, that this was going to be different than what they're used to. It started with the in-state class was really, really down. It's one of the worst years I've seen. Not a lot of depth, not a lot of star power. Some good players. There's always going to be good players. And some of them will play in the NFL. But it didn't have that five-star guy. It didn't have that Julio Jones or, even that big-time offensive lineman. So that hurts your class right out of the gate. Nationally, I had coaches telling me from several different schools leading in that nationally it was really a down year. And if you look, it was across the board. You couldn't find any defensive linemen. There wasn't many linebackers. There was 3 really good quarterbacks, but that after that it just sort of dripped down. So when you look at it from an in-state, from a national standpoint, the talent level is down. And then of course the coaching changes. We knew just the coaching changes from last year's alone would affect it, but when you throw on top of that losing guys like Jeremy Pruitt and Derek Ansley, on top of losing in the past Napier and Kirby Smart and Mario Cristobal, it just sort of built up. And with this class, I agree, it was a perfect storm.
Let's look at this 2018 Alabama recruiting class from a sort of position-by-position standpoint. Start at quarterback, no signees at the position for Alabama. Yesterday, we did see, based on your coverage, Hank South's coverage at BamaOnline.com, a flirtation with some quarterbacks, especially late in the process. Ultimately, Alabama ends up without a signee at the position, although I guess Braxton Barker coming in as a preferred walk-on. Talk about that situation a little bit and perhaps how it's impacted by what looks to be a really promising crop in-state even at the position in 2019.
Again, it's that term perfect storm where you have not only Jalen Hurts is playing well at Alabama, then you have Tua. Obviously, he busted out in the national championship game. So, you already have your back against the wall trying to recruit against those two guys. And again, that it's just not a good year in the state, in the nation for quarterback. You had Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, who are obviously 2 of the most elite prospects. We ranked them number 1 and number 2. But after that, it's a considerable drop-off. Now, later on in the process, a kid that was in the 2019 class reclassified to 18, and he's a legitimate top 5 candidate, ended up at USC. But, Alabama looked at some guys like the kid from Arizona, Purdy, and the Princeton commitment. Everybody made a huge deal about him. And, Alabama looked at him but never really pulled the trigger, never really put the full court press on him. James Foster was another kid in Montgomery. There just wasn't a lot of guys out there. And then, like you said, next year, when you look in the state, it's one of the best years for quarterbacks I've ever seen in the state of Alabama. 3 legit guys. And not only do you have 3 legit guys, they have great stories behind them. They have, Patrick Nick's son, Bo Nix, who's already committed to Auburn, is a terrific prospect. He's one of those 4-star, top 100 type kids. Then at Hewitt-Trussville, you have Paul Tyson, who is Bear Bryant's grandson, who has an Alabama offer. And then you've got Talia Tagliavola, whose brother is Tua, obviously, at Thompson, who's got a Alabama offer. So you got 3 big-time quarterbacks, in my opinion, all could be considered in that top 100. In fact, Tyson got an LSU offer today. Talia's picked up several offers in the past couple of weeks, and Bo is committed to Auburn as expected. But you had that on top of having a bad 18 class. So I think Alabama just wanted to focus on this 19 group.
At wide receiver for this Alabama class, Tim, a lot made yesterday of Justin Ross going out of state, signing with Clemson. Jacob Copeland of Pensacola was a target, ultimately signed with the home state Gators. But maybe we're not making enough of what Jalen Waddle can be in this offense, and as a return guy in special teams, Xavier Williams, another South Florida wide receiver, makes his way to Alabama, and then Slade Bolden, sort of an all-purpose guy from West Monroe, Alabama, Louisiana. What do you think of that group, even without Ross and Copeland? Hit the needs there?
Yeah, well, when you look at last year's class, who many are considering to be the best wide receiver signing class ever, it's going to be a little bit hard to follow that up. I think if you ask Mike Locksley which of all those receivers on the board, if he had to choose between Ross, Copeland, and Waddle, which one he would choose if he could only take one, I think he chooses Waddle every single day of the week, and I don't think it's close. He brings a little bit different than you look. I mean, obviously that, Judy, Ruggs, Smith, and, everybody talks up Terrell Shavers. Don't forget about him, the big long kid from Texas who redshirted. But Waddle brings that little special element. You hear a lot of Christian Kirk comparisons. New Alabama assistant Jeff Banks recruited Kirk at Texas A&M, and now he helped assist get him at Alabama. And also the special teams effect. You cannot, a punt returner electrify. And that's the thing about this class when you look. There's going to be some misses. When you look at it overall, there's going to be some misses, and people are going to say they didn't do this or they didn't do that. But there are some, at the very top, there is some grade A talent. And Waddle's as explosive as any offensive player in the country, bar none.
Let's go to the other side of the ball, the defensive line, the situation with Bobby Brown, the Arlington, Texas defensive lineman who flipped yesterday to Texas A&M. That whole situation, did it ultimately, in your opinion, and again, this is educated because you're in that mix and you talk to people who know and talk to the kids directly. Did that situation ultimately cost Alabama with Malik Langham as well, the kid from Huntsville?
I don't want to say it was an either-or. I mean, obviously Nick Saban's the one making those kind of decisions. I don't think it was an either-or proposition. What I think would happen with Malik is at the time, when Monday rolled around, Alabama was still involved with several high-rated guys. You had Quay Walker and J.J. Peterson, 5-star type caliber linebackers in Georgia. They still were neck and neck with Pat Surtain. Tyson Campbell, you had some California 5-star defensive backs that really shown a lot of interest. Alabama was still involved with 5-star offensive lineman Nicholas Petit-Frere, so they didn't have a lot of answers on guys. Don't forget Copeland and Waddle and Ross. They didn't have a lot of answers on those guys yet, so they really, I think, were trying to take a breath, slow down, and figure out. Of course, if they had Bobby, they probably didn't need Malik as much as they did. There wasn't as much of a need, but I really think they were just trying to slow down and get the bearing on some of those top guys and see what happened. In the meantime, Florida swooped in and took Langham. And Langham had an interesting recruitment to begin with. I mean, a very prideful kid. He grew up an Auburn fan. They put a full court press on the last week, and he would have nothing to do with it. He wanted to go to Alabama up until that last 48-hour window, where he ended up at Florida. So, but yeah, I wouldn't say Bobby. I mean, Bobby was a wild recruitment. Commitment. It was an odd. We knew it was odd when we started checking with other sources. And Oklahoma felt they were getting him. Texas A&M felt they were getting him, and sources close to Alabama felt they were getting him. We knew something was wrong right away.
Can't play for all three. Yeah.
No. Well, he might if he transfers. He wanted to. I don't know, enjoy the process, whatever you want to call it. But he obviously was, out and about. I mean, he even gave Hank South, who works with us, quotes the night before that he was signed with Alabama and Texas A&M wasn't a factor, and then signed with Texas A&M. So he picked up the phone to lie to Hank. So that's
wow.
That's the next level of deception amongst kids sometimes.
Yeah, that is next level.
Looking
at linebacker,
they usually just avoid it. They don't usually pick it up to do that. But
make
I don't
contact
think it
with
was
you
related to Bobby. I think that was one of the factors, though.
Huh. At the linebacker position, Quay Walker, I guess at the end of the day, that wasn't a huge surprise to see him not choose Alabama, despite being a commitment for quite some time. Vernon Jackson ultimately flips as well, but I guess there was some maybe mixed signals there with him in terms of where he would ultimately play position-wise. But Alabama does add Jalen Moody, a three-star linebacker from Conway, South Carolina yesterday. And I think maybe overlooked, and you tell me, Tim, the work that they were able to get done in the early period, especially on the outside at those spots, right?
Oh yeah, well we're forgetting guys like Jerez Parks and Anoma, a guy we haven't even talked about yet, who's going to end up is an outside linebacker, the number 3 player in the country. Again, this is probably the most explosive defensive player in the country. So, you add that to Waddle, who's probably, in my opinion, could easily be the most explosive offensive player. And there's Alabama did a lot in this class. But, yeah, the outside, they're going to be fine. I'm hearing Jerez Parks has a chance to play inside. He's running around that 240, 245 range. He sure looks the part. People forget that's a top 100 kid that Gray shirted last year. A kid a lot of staffs went on. And if you remember that whole drama, he ended up Gray shirt. His coach told us he probably had 25 or 30 calls from major schools within the next 48 hours trying to get Jerez to flip and or visit or, consider them or anything else to bring in that last class. But he held firm to Alabama. So I think the Moody kid, digging into him late, talked to some sources in South Carolina on college staffs, they were told straight up this kid had no chance to qualify. He lost his head coach. They were sort of behind, the assistants that were helping didn't really understand the recruiting process. He had a really good first semester and has put himself in really good shape to qualify. But if you watch his film, the kid's a thumper. He's a little bit like Reggie Ragland. I mean, he's one of that guys. Not, it's not what we're used to at Alabama lately, but it is that sort of enforcer thumper that we saw, a few years ago for Nick Saban.
Perhaps a Sean Dion Hamilton type.
Yeah,
down the road at some point.
Big, but bigger.
Yeah, he is. What is he? 6'2", 6'3", something like that.
Yeah, right around there, and he will hit you. He will bring it.
Sean's more in that 6 foot range. And then ultimately at defensive back, Saban talked about this yesterday. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that the back end of this Alabama defense, just looking at the players it was losing from the 2017 team, was of utmost importance, filling those needs. I don't think there was really a competitor in terms of needs when you look at the defensive backfield for Alabama and the quintet, the 5 defensive backs that all signed with Alabama between the early and then a later period. Patrick Surtain Jr., certainly the centerpiece of that yesterday as a 5-star corner. I tell you, Tim, looking at this group, and really all 5 are corner types. I'm sure there's versatility within them, and 1 or 2 could ultimately play safety if need be, or those sub-package roles. But just on the surface, as far as a group of corners go, I don't recall Nick Saban landing this type of group in his previous classes at Alabama.
No, Alabama's usually the one thing this team was a little different. Usually when Alabama has those starters on the field, those guys who are going to graduate, go in the draft, there's usually a young buck that we're watching really do well in the second team role or on special teams. Drake or Patrick, D. Milliner, those are guys that they just sort of were brought along slowly. We knew they were back there. This team really didn't have that. They had some young talent, but it's unproven. Obviously, Deontay Thompson stepped in and played well, and Shy Carter showed a little bit, especially in the second half of the national championship game. So Alabama was, speaking of a perfect storm in their favor, they lost six defensive backs. I mean, there was no talking around. They lost every starter. They lost, all the impact guys beyond, except for Deontay. So they could sell that position a lot easier. Getting Pat Surtain Jr. Just such a big deal for Alabama. I mean, the families got strong connections to the state of Louisiana, strong contacts with LSU. That was definitely a huge. He's the number one defensive back in the country, and if you watch his kid, I mean, him and the kid going to Georgia, who Alabama was neck and neck with Georgia for a long time. Those are two of the most special defensive backs you'll see: size, speed, toughness, ball skills, everything. So Pat was huge. And then there's a kid Job who was also from South Florida that is up in a prep school trying to get himself straight. And the one kid we never really talk about is Jalen Amore Davis. This is a top 100 guy from down there in Mobile. The out-of-state names were so big, we sort of just forget to talk about him. And that happens. You know what, Travis? You know this better than I do. That happens in every class. There's some guy, a Tim Williams, who we don't even really talk about, who turns out to be, a fantastic college player. There's just so many guys.
Well, they come from everywhere. Just look at Alabama's starting corners this past season. Anthony Averett, who until really his fourth year in the program was sort of an afterthought at corner, and then Levi Wallace, who actually took the walk-on path on his way to becoming a major contributor at corner in 2017. Tim, as we let you go here, news this morning that Alabama defensive line coach Carl Dunbar likely on his way to Pittsburgh as the Steelers' new defensive line coach. What do you sort of anticipate now with that opening? It looks like coming open and where Alabama could turn.
I think the easiest thing is to look is possibly Bo Davis, or even moving, letting Tosh coach the defensive line and bringing back Lance Thompson. I think that's the easy path. What Coach Saban showed us with his recent coaching search is he will go all over the country to get the guys he wants. So I think, when you look at all these coaches he brought in, and you're talking about an energized group of recruiters, when you're looking at guys like Carl Scott and Jeff Banks and Gaddis from Penn State and Pete Golding, these guys are all young, they're all hungry, and they all get after it. So it's going to be interesting. I'm not going to pretend to understand the mind or know Nick Saban's next move. He would checkmate me in 4 moves in any chess game we played. So I think the easy road, I think it could be Bo Davis. I think it could be Lance Thompson, but I really think he's going to go out and do his due diligence and get a certain kind of guy that he wants. And you know what? The one thing I like about this new coaching staff for Alabama, from a recruiting standpoint, they gel together really well. You saw a lot of guys working 2 or 3 at a time on these kids in a short period of time, so I think that's going to pay off for them.